The village of Arendor was ancient, a peaceful place. Nestled beside a whispering forest, its inhabitants knew little of the darkness that lay beyond their fields. But they knew the legend. They warned their children about it. The path of hate. It began as a barely discernible track at the edge of the forest. It wound through the ancient trees, growing more distinct with every step. The villagers spoke of it in hushed tones. They said it fed on anger and despair. It was a path that offered power, a terrible power, the power of vengeance. The villagers avoided the path. They knew the price of its power. They had seen those who had walked it. They had seen the emptiness in their eyes. Kale was a young man when the darkness touched his life. He was happy then. His days filled with laughter and the simple joys of life in Arendor. He had a sister, Alara. They were inseparable. Two halves of the same soul. Then Lord Drosen came to Arendor, a cruel man, driven by greed. Drosen wanted the land around Arendor. He saw the villagers as an obstacle. He would do anything to remove them. He had Alara killed. It was a lesson to the villagers, a show of power. Kale was devastated. His grief was all-consuming. It turned to rage. He wanted revenge. He wanted Drosan to suffer as he had suffered. Kale knew where he had to go. The path of hate called to him. He would have his vengeance, no matter the cost. The path was different for every traveler. It twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the forest, deeper into themselves. Kale stepped onto the path. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The trees seemed to press in on him. The air grew heavy, suffocating. The path whispered to Kale. It fed on his pain, his anger. It offered him solace. It promised him power. The whispers grew louder with each step. They echoed his own thoughts. They validated his rage. They urged him forward. Drosen must pay, the path whispered. He deserves to suffer. Vengeance is the only answer. Kale clung to the whispers. They were the only comfort he had left. The path led Kale to a clearing. A figure stood in the center, tall and gaunt, wrapped in shadows. This was the Warden of Hate, the guardian of the path, the collector of souls. He spoke, his voice was like gravel, each word a stone dropped into a still pond. "You seek power," the warden said. His voice was devoid of inflection, a statement of fact, not a question. "I seek vengeance," Kale replied. His voice was a rasp, unused for days, hoarse from unshed tears. The warden smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Vengeance is a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways. Are you willing to pay the price? Kale did not hesitate. Anything. The warden held out a hand. A dark mist swirled around it. "Then give me your pain, your anger, your humanity, and I will give you the power to destroy your enemy." Kale reached out. He did not hesitate. He felt a coldness spread through him. He felt his anger grow. He felt his humanity slip away. He felt powerful. He was ready. Section 5. The Price of Vengeance. Kale found Drosen in his castle. He no longer needed stealth. The power of the path radiated from him. It terrified Drosen's guards. They fled in terror. Drosen stood alone. He looked at Kale. He saw the emptiness in his eyes. He knew he was doomed. Kale raised his hand. The shadows danced around him. He felt no joy, no satisfaction, only a cold emptiness. Drosen screamed. It was a pathetic sound, the sound of a man facing his own mortality. Kale felt nothing. Drosen was gone. Only ashes remained. Kale had his vengeance, but it tasted like ash in his mouth. Section 6. The Ashes of Victory. The villagers hailed Kale as a hero. They celebrated his victory. They showered him with praise. But Kale felt nothing. He had his vengeance. But it had cost him everything. His humanity, his soul, his sister. He was a shell of his former self, an empty vessel. He saw the fear in the eyes of the villagers. They cheered him, but they were afraid of him. He was a monster. He had become what he hated. He had become Drosen. He left Arendor. He could not bear to stay there, not anymore. He had nowhere else to go. He returned to the path. He hoped it would give him solace. It did not. It only amplified his pain, his regret, his despair. Section 7. The path's true nature. The path was no longer a source of power. It was a prison, a cage of his own making. The whispers were gone, replaced by silence. A deafening silence. It was the silence of his own soul. Empty. Void. He was lost. Cale wandered the path for what felt like an eternity. Time had no meaning here. Only the endless cycle of pain and regret. He realized the truth. The path did not offer power. It offered oblivion. It took everything. It gave nothing in return. He had been a fool. Section 8. Alone on the path. He was alone. The path was empty, except for him. His reflection. He saw himself in the path, his true self, twisted and corrupted by hate. He had become a monster. The monster whispered to him, mocked him. "You are nothing," it hissed. "You are less than nothing. You are a waste. You are a failure. You are alone. You will always be alone." Cale fell to his knees. He could not escape the truth. He was lost. Section 9. The final whisper. The path offered no escape, no redemption, only oblivion. He was trapped. Forever. He closed his eyes. He welcomed the darkness. It was the only embrace he had left. A whisper. Faint. Almost inaudible. "Forgive yourself." Cale opened his eyes. He saw her, Elara, standing before him. She smiled. It was a sad smile, full of pity, full of love. "It's okay," she said. Her voice was a whisper, a memory, a dream. "You are forgiven." Then she was gone, and Cale was alone. He closed his eyes. He let the darkness take him. He was free.